Okay, I think most people are getting the idea of setting this up. Area in terms of K, you have to do by hand, no calculator. When do you need absolute value for the ln? When you know it might be negative, but from 0 to K is definitely positive. Watch the unchain rule. The derivative of the inside has to be 1, or you have to worry about chain rule. Okay, you could call this ln of k plus 2 over 2, right? Because you can combine the logarithms, but you don't need to. Okay, washers. Pi integral r squared minus r squared. The inner bound is from 0 to 0, because the lower, remember that you have a disks instead of washers if the side of the region is the line you're rotating around, and the x-axis is one side of the region. So I always include it just to make sure you remember that it's always washers. And I always include, just to remind you one last time, the line you rotate around is always in both squares. Okay, so if you rotate it around the line y equals 2, or for that matter x equals 3, and you had a function of y, you still have to have that number has to be in both squares. Okay, so 1 over x plus 2 squared is x plus 2 to the negative 2, not ln. Okay, so notice that it's easier to turn, you need to turn 1 over x plus 2 squared into a negative exponent to take the antiderivative, but then you want to turn it back into thingy to the negative 1 being in the denominator, turn it back into a normal fraction in order to actually calculate it. Okay, last part, unbounded region, so S, and you'll be rotating it around. Again, if they do this, and they do occasionally, you can't just plug in infinity plus 2. You have to say limit in order to weasel your way around it. But then you can just horse around and say, okay, well, infinity to the negative power is 0. And we're trying to find the volume. Okay, so the volume of the solid in part B, let me just make that pretty. We'll put the positive 1 pi over 2 first. Okay, so pi over 2 minus pi over k plus 2 is supposed to equal pi over k plus 2. The pi over k plus 2's do not cancel those. Okay, so pi times k plus 2 equals 4 pi. K plus 2 is 4, so k is 2. Okay, point values. Let's see. 2 points for this, 1 point for setting up the integral with proper bounds, 1 point for the antiderivative by hand. This is 3 points, 1 point for pi and the bounds, 1 point for the input, 1 1 point for getting to the final answer. This is 4 points. 1 point for the improper integral, 1 point for antiderivative and evaluation. So now 1 point for setting up an equation, and 1 point for actually solving it.